Right, so thanks for the introduction. So this is a joint work with Ihab El-Salamouni and Katusia Palamidesi. And so the context of this paper is location-based services. That is, personalized services that depend on the user's location. And in particular, so the kind of service that we have in mind are online interactive services. So typically the ones used by a smartphone when I send my location to a provider, and then right away in an online fashion I get back some service. And there is a huge variety of these services, like POI retrieval, dating is becoming quite popular, games, location-based games, super popular, social networks, traffic monitoring, you name it. All right, and of course all these things are super cool, right? So they keep the teenagers busy. But at the same time, disclosing location data has privacy issues, all right? So I'll try to summarize them in just one slide. So first issue is location data inherently are sensitive, so people don't want to be tracked. So in other words, if your ex works for Uber, then you're in a bit of trouble. So more importantly, location data are correlated to a variety of other sensitive data, right? So political, religious, medical, you name it, which gives rise to profiling threats. And nowadays, there are companies to do that for you. So you send the data to Factual, and they give you back the profile of the user. And third, location data are sufficiently unique and temporally correlated to be used for identification. So if I know the mobility profile of somebody, then I can easily identify him in an anonymized data set. All right, so the question is, what can we do about it? All right, and there's a variety of privacy-preserving techniques for location privacy. A simple and well-studied one is obfuscation, right? Adding noise. Simple example, so if I want to find POIs within 300 meters of my current location here, so what I can do is just a noise, generate the reported location, send that to Google, ask for, say, POIs around a larger area, get them back, and now my smartphone that knows where I am can filter out the junk and give me the one I care about. So the question is, what kind of formal privacy guarantees we can get out of such a simple mechanism as obfuscation? And again, there are several ways of answering these questions, or several privacy models for location privacy. The one I'm going to focus in this talk is geodiscoverability, very conveniently introduced by Rinku in the previous talk. So yeah, it was first introduced actually in pets a few years back, and the basic idea is that the closer geographically two locations are, the more indistinguishable they should be from the point of view of the adversary. So if the adversary tries to figure out whether I'm sitting in a cafe here in the center of Paris or at the hospital nearby, since the two locations are close, he should not be able to answer these questions. While if he wants to distinguish these two locations very far away, that's OK, because we still need to provide some information to get back to the service, right? And then if you want to do this formally, then you need to look at this ratio, but OK, that's fine. All right, that's about privacy. What about utility? Obviously, there's a ton of ways to define utility. The one we use is a widely employed one, which is simply the expected distance between x and z. So how far away, on average, is the real location from the reported one? And of course, the expected distance is taken with respect to some prior pi that depends on the user. So how likely the user is to be located on every location. And a utility metric that depends on the application. So how bad for my specific application it is to disclose z when the actual location is x. And now in this paper, we don't care about any particular application. So we choose to just use two, say, reasonable, arguably application agnostic ones. So the one is Euclidean distance, okay, obvious choice. But another good choice is the squared Euclidean distance for applications where the utility depends on some kind of area, right, like POI retrieval. So the area grows with the square of the distance. And the two are quite different, so they're not just trivially the same. All right. So we have our definition, have our utility. Now, how do we generate noise to satisfy this definition? And then the simple case is use the planar Laplace mechanism, right? It's a mechanism that involves adding noise from a distribution two-dimensional, looks like that. It's centered on the real location. And sampling from this distribution can be done efficiently by using polar coordinates. So the approach is simple, efficient, makes no assumptions about the size of our grid or the precision or anything. But the downside is that utility is not optimal, meaning that there might be other mechanisms that satisfy the same definition, but gives us better utility, right? Which is a bit of a bummer. All right, so then the natural thing that we did a year later is, of course, all right, if there are better mechanisms, let's construct them. How can you do that? And their solution is linear programming. So we can construct a linear program whose solution is the optimal mechanism. That's the good news. The bad news is we need to put one constraint for every x prime, and z. So we have cubic constraints on the number of locations, possible locations for a grid. And then on top of that, you add the high exponent of linear programming, and you end up with something which is polynomial, but terribly inefficient in practice. So the pros is optimality, of course, but the problem is that it's very inefficient. So it's feasible only if you restrict just 100 locations, not more. So what typically is done in all these papers, including ours, but also other papers that look at optimal construction for location privacy, is that, well, you take the space you're interested in, and you split in some very coarse grid where the cells are more than 1 kilometer wide, which is problematic for a variety of reasons. So you look at what happens in practice. Well, the planar Laplace is being used by several tools, including our own location guard, but also other tools for other people, and also QGIS plugin. While the optimal construction, well, at least for geo-indistributability, I know no practical use of it. Right. So in practice, efficiency trumps optimality easily. Which brings us to the goal of the paper, right? Which is quite simple: bridge the gap between the two. So is it possible to have something that substantially outperforms the planar Laplace, but is efficient at the same time, right? And by efficient, I mean, so I should be able to use it for large finite grids, so not 100 locations, but 100. Okay, so I should apologize to the webinar people who just had a. All right. So yes, I'm not talking about 100 locations, but 100,000 locations. But also, sometimes you don't even want to put any constraint at all, right? Or maybe your locations are so, your space so big that you just want to consider an infinite discrete plane. Or sometimes you don't even want to constrain the precision in which you. All right. Is it better?
Higher up.
Higher up. Okay? Better? All right. All right, so we want to treat all these cases. All right, and what are our proposed solutions? So the first is to remap noisy locations. So a noisy location that offers little utility to some other noisy location that hopefully offers better utility. So I'm going to explain how this can be done. Another thing is to use a discrete or finite variant of the mechanism in case the domain is discrete or finite, or a combination of the above. All right, so let's talk about remapping. So the idea of remapping is quite simple, all right? So the planar Laplace is quite dummy the way it adds noise. So if you're somewhere around the sea, then it's quite likely that the location you're going to generate is in the water, all right? And then, quite obviously, I mean, reporting something in the water is not going to be ideal utility with respect to the utility. So what we can do is quite simple. So we're going to employ some remapping function that is going to map all the points that we think that are not going to give you good utility to a point z prime that hopefully will give you some better utility. Right? Simple as that. Now the good thing is that remapping preserves privacy. So any kind of privacy. So we have showed that for geo-indistributability and adversarial error, another commonly used privacy metric. But I would argue that any reasonable notion of privacy should be preserved by remapping, because remapping just is a post-processing of public information without looking at the secret. So yeah, any reasonable notion of privacy should be preserved by that. So you have a technique that is, well, simple, safe, and we're going to see effective. All right. So I have the option of using any remapping function. Which one am I going to use? Natural choice is Bayesian remap. So first thing, I'm going to construct a posterior probability by applying Bayesian inference that takes into account the prior, the mechanism, and the reported point z. And once I have the posterior, I'm going to remap z to the z prime that minimizes the expected distance from x with respect to the posterior that I have just constructed. Right? Simple as that. Now the good news is that this is optimal, right? The remapping, meaning that out of all possible remappings that I might use, right? This one will give me the best utility. All right? This might not give me the same utility as the optimal mechanism, right? But it will be the optimal remap. Okay. So I have a nice formula. Okay, that's good. But how practical is this formula? Let's see. So if I have a finite grid, and it's not huge, up to say 100,000 cells, or a bit more or less, then I can apply just directly the formula, just compute it, and then pick the best Z prime, and it's good, efficient. Now, what if the number of cells is too big or even unbounded? Then obviously I cannot apply the formula directly, but what can I do is a little trick. I'm just going to restrict to a limited area around Z, right? The point that I want to remap. And we can choose this area in a way that we are relatively sure that with high probability, the Z prime we're searching will be in this area, right? So in the end, it's going to be also efficient. We're going to find the Z prime we care about. Good. So things get a little bit more complicated if we want to remap on the continuous plane, all right? Now, first thing to note here is that, so even though the domain we assume to be continuous, the prior we're going to use, well, most of the time it's still going to be discrete, because the prior comes from some finite data set, all right? So I have some data set, finite data set of points of interest, or past check-ins, or uses of the system, or whatever, and this will give me my prior, all right? So first thing I'm going to do, same as before, I'm going to restrict to an area around Z, and I'm going to filter my data set and keep only the points that are close to that. Okay, so the data set might be huge, okay, but I can filter it quite efficiently. Now, the problem is that even in this restricted area, there are still infinitely many Z primes to try, all right? Any of the points here is a candidate for minimizing the expected distance, okay? So, of course, one thing to do would be to discretize and try to approximate that. But for the specific case of the two utility metrics that we consider in the paper, there are more efficient solutions. So if we care about squared Euclidean utility, then we can just use the centroid weighted by the posterior probabilities there. So in this simple example of these points, so this will be the centroid, and this is guaranteed to minimize the expected squared distance from this point. And then if you care about standard Euclidean distance, so a bit surprisingly, so the centroid is no longer the optimal. However, we can find the optimal by solving what is well known as the Weber problem. So in that case, that will be the point given by the Weber problem, which optimizes the standard Euclidean distance from those points. And of course, there's an efficient algorithm for that. So that's fast. Good. So then what about the prior? So I need a prior to do that. Well, so in many works, you assume that you have some well-known, high-quality prior about the specific user. We're going to avoid that for two reasons. First, user-specific data are hard to collect. Maybe I don't have data about my user. And second, so using the user's prior to build a mechanism discloses information about that prior. So it's one thing to say that the adversary might have prior information about the user, maybe some powerful adversary, and another thing to willingly disclose prior information to the adversary. So we don't want to do that. So we're going to use a generic prior, which could be either service independent, built by a list of known POIs, or service dependent. For instance, I can use aggregate data from past uses of the service. And if you're worried about privacy of the aggregate data, we can do that under differential privacy. Which brings us to the second trick we do to improve utility, which is, so if our domain is discrete or finite, we're going to use discrete and finite variants of the planar Laplace. The goal being to directly generate locations that are valid, all right, that are not outside our domain. So for the discrete plane, we can use what we call the planar geometric mechanism, which looks like Laplace, except that this is probability mass, not density. And the only thing we need to do is just approximate the coefficient there and then draw from a discrete distribution. It's easy. You have a finite grid, then we can use what we call tight constraint mechanism. It looks similar, except that the coefficient here can depend on x, and we can compute it up to a certain number of points. So evaluation, we use the Guala and Brighted kite datasets, 80% training for to find out the global prior, 20% for testing. For the continuous and discrete plane, we use the full dataset, and for a finite grid, we just pick an area in San Francisco. And here are the results. So on x-axis, we have the privacy level. Y-axis is the Euclidean loss. And the box plots are over the various users in the testing dataset. So here we have the standard Laplace. So the box plot is just squeezed because the utility is the same for every user. It's not different. And this is the remapped version that varies depending on the user. So let's say that users that behave similarly to the global prior will benefit more from the remap, and users that have some unorthodox behavior will maybe are actually hurt. But on average, the standard Laplace will be 20% worse than the remapped version. So this is on the discrete plane. Similar results. Now we have two mechanisms, Laplace and geometric. Again, remapping helps a lot. And geometric is marginally better than the Laplace, not much. For a finite grid now, again, similar results with three mechanisms. Laplace geometric tight constraints. Again, the remap helps. And especially for low levels of privacy, these two outperform the Laplace by a lot. And finally, we did some comparison with the actual optimal mechanism, which can only do for very small sizes. So here is the actual optimal. Well, it's the best because it's optimal. But we see that the remapped versions of the other mechanisms, well, approach, say, the optimal behavior while being much more efficient than it. So that's it. To conclude, have techniques to improve the utility of the Laplace while being efficient at the same time. And for future work, we would like to develop some remap tailored to specific applications, because so far we have these generic ideas, and also implement it in location guard and see how well it works for the purposes of our browser plugin. So thanks, and happy to answer questions.